Hello, friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on Sirius XM Channel 130. Of course, our radio show is always a podcast. Go to thecatholicAssociation.org/podcasts or directly to wherever you listen to your podcasts. Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie, joined today by my co-worker at the Catholic Association and my co-hostess, Ashley McGuire. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Hey, Gracie.
We thought we'd touch upon a couple of interesting subjects in today's this segment of today's show. And one of them is a piece in Vanity Fair recently that caught both of ours attentions, and maybe lots of Catholics. I don't know if a lot of Catholics are reading Vanity Fair or like committed Catholics are reading Vanity Fair, but wow, it was a really long piece called Behind the Catholic Rites Celebrity Conversion Industrial Complex. Really long, really researched, all about how in the mind of the writer, the Catholic, there's all these conversions happening on the with Catholics, or people converting to the Catholic Church, people who are influencers that are very conservative in their outlook in general, and then are sort of infecting the church in a sense. Like that's what I got out of it. And of course, they're talking about people like Candace Owen, Russell Brand, J.D. Vance, because you would see that from that perspective, from the Vanity Fair perspective, from the perspective of the writer, that would be a kind of infection, right? If very conservative figures like J.D. Vance converts to the Catholic Church and brings his own political outlook. They also mentioned Jordan Peterson, who's not a convert, but maybe is flirting with it, or a lot of Catholics, people like Bishop Robert Barron, have referenced his work in the way that it opens up new opportunities amongst young people who have been raised in like a psychological therapeutic culture. Many of them disaffected men, young men who don't see a lot of meaning in the secular progressive idea of what their lives should look like. That's what I see as Jordan Peterson doing. But this Vanity Fair article is more about Jordan Peterson sort of infecting the church. That's how I read it. How did you read it, Ashley?
Well, I think there's a lot of attention right now to converts to Catholicism because of J.D. Vance, because he's a recent convert. And, I can't remember the last time that there was a conservative Catholic on any ticket. So I think that maybe what triggered this, and certainly there has been a lot of kind of high profile conversions lately. And I think the thing that we have to really sort of think about and tease apart is, there's absolutely an effort in the mainstream press to paint conservative Catholics as fringe, nationalistic, to put us in a really negative light and to lump us all in the same box.
Well, they call us right wing, which I think is a very strange term, right? They never talk about the left wing. There's always this right wing, and then it seriously very quickly veers off into ultra right wing. And really, what are we talking about? We're talking about conservative Catholics have social ideas about the social order that were totally mainstream, like President Obama style, just a few years ago, right? I mean, we've sort of stood in the same place. Marriage is between a man and a woman, and life is sacred. All lives are equally sacred. And the world has turned left. You make a really good point, Ashley, just to drill down on that for 1 second, about J.D. Vance. If J.D. Vance, as a conservative Catholic, attains, the second highest post in the land, he'll be a huge contrast to what the left was really happy to call a Catholic being on the top, on the top of our country, which was President Joe Biden. I say was because I feel like he's gone in a sense. So, that must be very annoying for the left, right? Because I think it's been very comforting for the left to have somebody calling themselves very Catholic who also espoused a lot of leftist ideals, which are clearly non-Catholic, like open and free abortion for 40 weeks of pregnancy. Do you think that's pushing a lot of buttons and getting people riled up, ready to sort of discredit conservative Catholics?
Well, I think there certainly are some recent Catholic converts who, either because they were already in positions of influence with, millions of followers, or because of the things that they said, probably because they had virtually no formation. Some of these very, very new converts are in positions of greater influence than, cardinals, in the sense of the number of people that they're reaching. And that is something that I think, it's good. We always want to bring more Catholics into the fold. But we also want to make sure that all of us, regardless, whether we have a small or a large influence, are speaking from a place that's under continual formation. And, I've been a Catholic for 15 years, and I feel like I barely know anything, it's not true, but I'm constantly reading and learning more about the faith. And we need so much, we need that formation so much. And the church needs us to have that formation. And I think that is a very kind of strange challenge of our modern time with social media and the sort of collapse of traditional media. I mean, up until 10 years ago, it seemed like unless you went on a cable news outlet or wrote an opinion editorial for one of, maybe 5 newspapers, you didn't have a platform. And now there's all these kind of young, new Catholics out there, and it's a new frontier for the church. I think it's both good and potentially hazardous.
Well, one thing you're saying that I think I'd like to stop and talk about that for a moment is this need for continual formation. I find that many converts, my husband, for instance, who is a convert from Judaism, or he would say from atheism because he was a secular Jew, but it's really wonderful to watch a convert deepen their knowledge of the faith because they come with this sort of tabula rasa, right? They don't know. They just don't know. Like, you don't know what you don't know, right? You have to find out and you have to learn. And it's really wonderful watching that development. And converts, the ones I've known are ones that are very interested in making those strides, right? Like deepening their understanding, broadening their ideas, delving into the amazing treasures, intellectual treasures of our faith, right? That go back many, many centuries, and connecting all those dots. And then they have all these aha moments, right? But this takes place over a significant amount of time for most people. Most people don't, convert and then read St. Thomas Aquinas and all the commentaries, and they're just up on everything. So there's that issue, right? That it takes converts time to do that. And then there's the other issue that so many cradle Catholics aren't taking the time to do that either. And maybe they didn't get that kind of formation in school, or in CCD if they weren't in Catholic school. Because I think we are failing in general in American Catholicism. I would say we're more failing than succeeding in really forming young people in their faith. There's not enough of intellectual rigor and excitement about Catholic culture from people who are teaching it. That's been my experience out in the field. Has that been yours?
Well, yeah, and I'm thinking of a recent guest that we had on, Tom Carroll, talking about just the fact that even Catholic schools, I mean, the percentage of children who go through a Catholic education who end up walking away from their faith is stunning. So it's a pervasive issue. And I think when you couple that with this kind of wild, wild west of social media and influencers, it can create a sort of dizzying atmosphere, and that, a dizzying atmosphere for people who are looking for the truth. And, there's I think there's a reason, and the article, references like Harrison Butker. There's a reason his graduation speech went viral, which was because, he said he spoke uncomfortable truths.
And truths that people are thinking. People are thinking
Right.
these things. They're thinking, wait,
they're afraid to say it.
They're afraid to say it, but they're thinking, wait, maybe the young women I know are unhappy because they're trying to have it all according to this pattern that's not possible. It's not gratifying to what they really want and need.
Yeah.
And he actually dared to say it on a big platform. The Vanity Fair piece didn't like that either.
No, and the thing that I think we also have to be on alert for as Catholics is, again, this effort to lump all Catholics into this quote unquote conservative Catholic right-wing nationalistic box. I mean, Bishop Robert Barron does not belong in the same paragraph as Candace Owens, someone who's out there openly saying anti-Semitic crazy things on Twitter. And that is, I think, a very concerted effort to, I think, ultimately strip away the public credibility of, what I would call sort of Christian orthodoxy, and to make us all seem like kind of a menace. And that's that.
Well, in the same way that the same group of people complains about having too many Catholics on the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
We're said to be, I guess, troglodytes, knuckle draggers who want to impose old-fashioned, superseded views of human anthropology and social mores on a more enlightened public.
Mm-hmm. And, there certainly is, I think there is truth to the fact that, Orthodox Catholicism is seeing a revival. I mean, there was an AP story a few months ago about the fact that, young seminarians are overwhelmingly faithful to church teaching.
We've all seen this when we see the young priests come up, right, and join as the associate vicar or associate pastor. I forget what their titles are when they join a parish. And you can sense the excitement in the pews. They're like, oh, we're going to get a young conservative seminarian. Because sometimes the older priest who's there is the guitar playing priest who's not that reverent around the altar. That's been my experience. I hate to be so complaining.
Well, no, but I think that this sort of revival of orthodoxy, especially among young Catholics, is also what's contributing to attracting new converts. That there's sort of an energy there, and a return to truth and to reverence, that is, contributing to this sort of wave of Catholic converts that we're seeing. And so, that's a good thing. And, you look at the incredible things that people like, Father Mike Schmitz. I mean, Father Mike Schmitz, he's an influencer, but he's also
for sure
not out there on Twitter and going to fringe conferences where, things that we wouldn't even recognize as Catholic are going on. So again, I just think that that's kind of one of the challenges in a time when there's just a dizzying amount of content. And that actually, I think, requires the laity who are not influencers. I mean, that's another call for formation, is we need to be able to sift through this dizzying mountain of Catholic media content that's out there to know what is actually, enriching our spiritual life and enriching our public life, as opposed to what's destructive. I mean, I think there's a few sort of obvious things, like when it's full of ad hominem attacks.
Right. Anything that's vulgar, aggressive,
hateful, spiteful.
That can't be Catholic.
No, that is not that's not the face we want to put out for the world as Catholics. But you look at something like what Father Schmitz is doing, and it's incredible. I mean, I think his Apple podcast was his Bible in a Year was the #1 downloaded podcast on Apple, and that's something that's just literally reading the Bible.
He's literally reading the Bible, but in such a great way. We have to replay his. I have to replay that great episode we had where he explained it. He's such a genial man. He does it in such a great way. He puts all the pieces together of the Bible so that you can read it as one document, as opposed to you have all these ideas, right? Like, oh, so-and-so was on a big boat and then something else happened. Wonderful, Father Mike Schmitz. However, I wanted to bring up something else. One of the things that I think a lot about is someone like Jordan Peterson, who's doing a lot of he has had a lot of contact with Bishop Robert Barron. His wife converted, and he has some sort of and I'm not saying this isn't just me who says it. Bishop Barron says it. He has some sort of magical key to the young male imagination. And if there's something that makes me a little worried about the church, is that it's very feminine these days. The church feels very feminine, and femininity is wonderful, but it puts off young men, right? Like, for them to feel attracted to the church, they can't think of it as a place where old middle-aged ladies like me live, right? I live in the second pew, so the church ladies. Anyway, I think that's an interesting part of this, of like the influencer who can redirect souls towards the church, and as you say, towards a church that feels more conservative, because the liberal parts of it have maybe self-selected out, right? Like maybe they're not going. I mean, if you're like a very liberal Catholic, you probably don't go to Mass every Sunday. Or maybe you go twice a year, right? There's like the Easter, Christmas Catholics, and maybe after a few years of that, you stop doing that even. And so the church becomes more conservative because the church is more of the Orthodox faithful. Is that your experience?
Well, I just think it's a lot of things. I mean, it's also, if you're more faithful to church teaching, it's more likely that you're going to have a bigger family. I mean,
that's true.
The family size of faithful Catholic families is just, more commonly larger. So I think there's so many things going on, and it's so interesting that it's Jordan Peterson's wife. So she did convert to Catholicism, and
a beautiful story. Around that.
Beautiful story. And that's an example of a public conversion that I think is good for the church, because, she talks about the rosary, being the thing that brought her in. And, it's funny with Jordan Peterson, maybe it's because I'm married, and so my husband is the only man I really spend time around, but I find that his following is with women.
Yeah, that's true too. There's a lot of women.
And maybe it's because women are craving, they want to see, masculinity too. They want to see it in their husbands, and they're trying to raise
They want to see it held up as a model so that they can teach it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, I think there's been a real effort to kind of, a bit of a smear campaign against Jordan Peterson. I admit that I followed him more closely several years ago, and now he's got all these different programs going on with Ben Shapiro that seem interesting, maybe a little bit more corporate and more involved than I have the time to follow. But he's a very thoughtful person, and it will be very interesting to see what happens. And he's somebody who I do think that if he converts, I pray that he finds a really good spiritual director, but is somebody that would probably bring a lot of people along with him on an intellectual and spiritual journey.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And again, although women like him, I think also a lot of younger men who will find his call to adventure, right, resounding within them, and then also helping them to see our faith as a call to adventure. Because it's a great adventure to be a faithful Catholic. I mean, you're really striking out for the deep, into the deep, right? You're out there fishing for souls, and you are putting yourself in positions that are more uncomfortable than you would otherwise, because you have goals and meaning that are overarching. You're having more children, as you mentioned before. And these are things that require a sense of adventure and a sense of hope, a sense of joy, lots of hope, lots of faith, so that you can, because the world's a hard place. And,
Yeah.
and I do believe that people convert to the Catholic Church for its intellectual rigor, its philosophical rigor, its strong stance on ethics and morals. But most especially because it is a call, it's a place of joy. It's a place of joy and faith and hope. And these virtues are things that all of us need, even just to get through our difficult days. There's nobody out there who's listening to this is not going to have a moment in their day today that is going to be a challenge. And maybe a giant challenge, maybe a small one, but a challenge nonetheless. I mean, unless you're hunkered down in your basement and just sticking to your online content. And even then, that could be very difficult, right? Which reminds me, let's talk for a moment about the online. There's a lot of stuff going on right now with criticism against the constancy of young people being online, right? I've read things as high as 9 hours a day plus schoolwork for a teenager, a regular teenager, girls more than boys. 9 hours a day staring at a screen. And you see it. You see a young couple out with their toddlers, a couple toddlers, and each of their toddlers has their own little iPad with like Mickey Mouse ears around it so that when they drop it, it doesn't crack. How deeply are we damaging young people? How deeply are people damaged? Or do you think that all this talk that we read about girls especially going into, falling down into holes of despair and bitterness have everything to do with screen time, or that's just one component of a much bigger, more sort of dysfunctional picture of life?
Yeah. Well, I think nobody has gotten this better than nailed this issue more closely than Jonathan Haidt. I mean, he's addressed this from both sides, both his book about screens, The Anxious Generation. It's an absolute must read for anybody who's a parent, where he talks about the actual neurological science between what's happening to children's and teenagers' developing brains, literally being rewired because of their excessive use of technology. But he also talks about how like social media and all these platforms are constantly pumping out these victimhood narratives that young people are actually believing and internalizing, and that women, because girls and women, young women especially, because of our natures, are more prone to have like a emotional, psychological internalization of these ideas that like our rights are being taken away, that your body is somehow being infringed upon. I mean, these narratives that are being constantly pounded, not just by the mainstream press, but by all these TikTok influencer people that we're talking about. All they hear are these negative victimhood narratives, and that it's especially girls who are internalizing these thoughts and these ideas, most of which are lies, and it's causing them to have like suicidal thoughts. And so it's really concerning. And I will say, though, that, to try to be a little bit hopeful, I think the kind of revolution that Haidt has sparked with his book is pretty incredible. I mean, you're seeing school district after school district implementing pretty stunning 180s when it comes to their cell phone policies.
And screen policies too, because sometimes, well, it's been my experience that schools are so much more comfortable handing out iPads than textbooks, right? It's so much easier to give every kid an iPad and then just resubscribe to the textbooks than these giant piles of textbooks. So the kids are just online.
Yeah. At my daughter's old school, by 5th grade, all her homework was online.
That's terrible.
So we left that school, and now she's in 7th grade and she still doesn't have a phone or an email address. And, she doesn't read it, and she's reading Shakespeare. And so
when I was an adolescent, I had a very hard adolescence. I had I was moving every year. I was new in like the country and I didn't understand the culture very well. It was very difficult. And I spent so much time in my room reading. And I was thinking, for me, that was where I could go and repair the difficulties and the wounds, of being out there in a hard culture that I didn't understand. And then all the things that happen when you become a young woman, and the relationships suddenly with boys and men that become clouded and weird. And these girls, these poor young girls nowadays, they're never off. They never get a moment off. Instead of going to the room and opening, a book and just going to a different time and getting like this bigger picture, right? Like a bigger picture view of life. Instead, they're always on that Instagram comparing themselves, their bikini shots to somebody else's.
Yeah, and the cyberbullying. I forgot to mention that. But, you're going through this extremely vulnerable period, and it's just a torrent of cyberbullying. So it's really great to see that there's finally some change happening with regards to children and screens.
Yeah, and I think it has to be both grassroots, parental, and also maybe from the top down, demanding that the government ask these social media companies to treat our children the way they treat their children, because it's well known that the owners of all these big companies, they don't give their children screen time because they know how damaging it is.
Right.
Well, thank you, Ashley, for joining me today. And
thanks, Gracie.
We'll keep having wonderful conversations. Thank you.
Look forward to it.
Every morning, the Catholic Association reviews all the latest news and sends our subscribers a carefully curated collection of the most important news of the day. Items are specifically selected for a smart Catholic audience like you. Don't let the world take you by surprise. Subscribe to our daily media roundup at thecatholicassociation.org. Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie, and we have our next guest on the line. Her name is Victoria McEachern, and she's the producer of a new movie that will be shown in October called Heart of a Servant, the Father Flanagan Story. Now, Victoria, I have to tell you, I just finished watching the screener, and my eyes are full of tears, and
wonderful.
I'm so moved. The hairs on my arms are still standing up. And I came to the United States as an older child. I was 11 or 12. And there's a lot of Americana and American history and American culture that sometimes I find myself stumbling into as an adult and just being utterly bowled over by the beauty of it. And this is one story. I've heard the words Boys Town. And I'm just blown away. And I'll tell you one more thing before I start asking you questions about the movie.
Please, yes.
Yesterday was the anniversary of the day that my husband and I met our child in the orphanage. Our fifth child we adopted from an orphanage. And that orphanage was an institution. It was not a home. And what I learned from your beautiful movie is that Boys Town, now I'm getting teary-eyed, Boys Town was a home and not an institution.
Yes.
And I know the difference. I have a child I love who spent time in an institution, and it was not a home. And anyway, thank you for making this movie.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing all that. As you speak about tears and getting goosebumps and things like that, that happened to us a lot over the last 3 years as we were producing this film. And speaking with people in interviews over and over again, people would share these stories of these really personal connections to Father Flanagan, in particular parts of his story, like you just spoke of, that really struck them. So that's so encouraging to hear.
Another thing that was so striking to me also is the wonderful story of how he was this amazing pioneer when it came to racial problems in the United States, to solving our racial issues, which today, I have to say, today seem worse than ever in a very different way, but they're very strong right now. And watching this movie about Father Flanagan, I see that he had the right idea, that the right idea is to see each person as a child of God and full stop. And I feel, and tell me how you feel about this and how the movie expresses this, that was the genius of Father Flanagan.
There are so many ways in which he was a genius, right? And so led by the Spirit. And there's, as you said, there's a story near the beginning where it talks about why Boys Town is its own town, its own place. And that was so Father Flanagan could have a home for boys of all races, all religions, that was not subject to Jim Crow laws at the time. Mm-hmm. And so, that genius of it, right, is that there were so many boys to care for, and he wanted to make sure that none were excluded. And so for him, that was a very creative way to be able to build Boys Town in the way that he knew was right.
Yeah, and in that way, that was so true to Catholic social teaching, right?
Yes.
That I think that Father Flanagan is one of those shining examples of our faith, of the Catholic faith, of how the Catholic faith moves into different spaces and different times and different countries, and it brings these truths to bear, and it just illuminates this bright light, right? So maybe that great truth in American society, that every child is a child of God, needed to be illuminated by someone like Father Flanagan, and in such a way that was so inspiring and so moving to so many. So inspiring and moving. I think especially of, during the Second World War, when he could see that there would be children all over the world who would be perhaps orphaned by the war and in quite a desperate situation. And so he took the initiative to write to the president and to offer his services and to kind of say, hey, I think I may be able to help. My services are yours to command. And for that, it was at that time, his Boys Town ministry was thriving. It was busy. It was very demanding. And still he looked at all of the boys right in front of him who loved him dearly, and he loved them. And he looked beyond that to children all over the world. And he left Boys Town to go on these quite demanding trips, to visit children all over the world, to see how the United States could care for them. He was moved. I learned from the movie that he was moved by this idea that there are no bad children. Right?
That's right.
And that if a child is in a vulnerable, painful, abandoned, destitute condition, fending for himself or herself, that child is not only suffering, they're also open to all these terrible temptations and possibilities, where they're going to very likely fall into a life of crime, of disorder, a life where they will never be able to be the person that God meant them to be because of these outside circumstances. I feel like that's what was motivating him to see care for children as a way to make each child a saint in the end, right? Like, who can you be? Mm-hmm. You're a child of God with the right ingredients, with the right love, with the right care, with the right tenderness. You can grow up to be that saint that God envisioned.
That's right. Yes, his famous line, there's no such thing as a bad boy. And I think it's hard for us to understand sometimes just how innovative that sort of approach was at the time. Gloria Purvis is in the film, and she speaks quite powerfully about the reality for Father Flanagan of caring for each and every one of these boys and really fighting against this notion that there were any bad boys, that all of them, they needed a place to thrive. They needed an environment that would love them and nurture them. And for Father Flanagan, too, he grew up in a very warm, very loving family back in Ireland. And for him, he wanted to bring that environment to boys everywhere. And he knew how that environment had nurtured him and had formed him quite deeply. And so he was doing everything he could to give boys a chance to experience that environment and to be formed in the same way.
This is somehow, watching this, I see Boys Town sort of, in a way, an indictment of our current system of where children fall into a system. They don't fall. A child is abandoned, endangered, has to be removed from a terrible situation in the family. And there's a system to take care of him, but there doesn't seem to be a home. And Father Flanagan had this idea that is so much higher and more noble than plugging these children into a system, which we know can go so horribly wrong so much of the time. What do you think about that, about the way that he understood what the child needed was a home?
I think for him, it was obvious because of his upbringing. It was obvious. And it was also, again, I use the word innovative, but it was quite startling and different to people in that day. And as you said, can be today too, is that there are organizations that were directly influenced by Father Flanagan's approach to child welfare, which was completely different from the punitive measures of the time. And like you said, it's a home, not an institution. Mm-hmm. And so for all of us, I think it's to not be too dismayed or fall into too much despair at the difference, but let it encourage us to continue to fight to care for children in the way that they deserve, in the way that respects their dignity, and that brings them closer to being able to experience that home atmosphere.
He went back to Ireland at one point and was hailed as a returning son of the fatherland, right, of Ireland. But then he found that in Ireland, children were being housed in these reformatories where they were being treated like little criminals, and that also brings up another important part of what he taught us, right, about treating children properly, is that it's those juvenile facilities and reformatories are not the place to rehabilitate children. It's not that you don't rehabilitate children with guards; you rehabilitate them with love. That's right.
That's right. His trip back to Ireland at that time was quite profound. Like you said, the film with Spencer Tracy and the big Hollywood movie had come out not so soon before, and so he was welcomed back as a movie star. He was very well known in the United States and all over at that point, and so welcomed back in that way. But of course, with Father Flanagan, he was not satisfied to just accept all of this praise and not pay attention to struggles that people had written to him in advance of. And so for all of that was what Father Flanagan did, is that he was so beloved and simply liked by so many people, but he was always willing to be unlikable and to be uncomfortable and to go into those situations and speak up against things. And certainly when he was departing Ireland and he said, "These are a disgrace," he knew those comments would be very unpopular. But that was something that he was always more than willing to do in order to speak up for kids in particular.
What is to you the importance of this film? What do you hope that it accomplishes?
I think ultimately, Father Flanagan's cause for canonization is open and it is being reviewed. And so for us, ultimately, it's perhaps the life of a saint. And for people to get to know him. I know for me, I feel so privileged to have been able to run just about every interview for the film, which meant more than anything, sitting down in front of people who were able to tell me these stories with deep affection and devotion for Father Flanagan and get to know him. And I've been really inspired by him. And like you said, when you watched the film, there was a really particular part of it that you connected with. And so that's ultimately what I hope the film can do, is allow people to be encouraged and inspired by Father Flanagan's example and to feel like they know him and have a friend in him and can pray for him and seek his intercessory prayer.
I also feel watching the film that this is a wonderful project to help the culture of the United States remember the great Catholic influences that have taken place. Whether it's what's the Italian nun that I just Mother Cabrini.
There you go. Yes,
Mother Cabrini. Yes. That's a wonderful movie. Mother Cabrini, Father Flanagan, the priest who started Father McGivney. Yes. Anyway, we have all these amazing examples of Catholics changing the culture of America, illuminating the culture of America, ennobling it, raising it, showing America how to take care of its poor, how to disregard color, creed, and race, in a way that America promised to do at its founding, but needed these great Catholics, these great saints, to show America how to do it. Do you see Father Flanagan in that vein?
I see Father Flanagan as such a leader, and as he was so proudly Irish and American. He was Irish American. He loved Ireland, and he loved his family and friends and growing up there. And he also deeply loved America. Even to be named America's #1 war dad, because so many of the boys went to fight for their country. And so with Father Flanagan, I think absolutely, he joins the ranks of so many leaders that have done really incredible things, and certainly we can look to him and look to his example. I think especially of a quote from Dr. Heather Fryer, a historian in the film, when she kind of mentions that it might not have been important for Father Flanagan to live a really long life, because it was very tragic and devastating to everybody when he died so suddenly in Berlin. But that, isn't that the story of so many of our saints, is that they die suddenly, but as he said, it's God's work, so it will continue.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about the movie, its opening. How can our viewers, listeners watch it, and what you're hoping for as far as the distribution of the movie?
So it is released by Fathom Events on October 8th, so coming up very quickly. And so people can get tickets directly through the Fathom website or going to fatherflanaganfilm.com. And certainly there's theaters all over, and they're adding more theaters and more show times in response to demand. So we're just so excited for everybody to see the film then.
And will it be sort of nationwide? Will it be hard to access for our listeners, depending on where they are?
It's all over. It's in towns all over the United States, hundreds and hundreds of theaters. So if you go to the website and you don't see a theater near you, then you can submit a request to, because they're adding theaters all the time.
I was thinking I want to organize. Obviously, when I see these things, I always think of my parish. I think of of things like, getting a whole group from the parish to go. That always seems to be a good idea. I was also thinking of this movie. It would be a great movie for high school students, middle school students, because they're very fixated on race now in their education. And I do think that Father Flanagan had exactly the right handle on race relations, which is that, again, we're all children of God. And he knew how to make that work in a way that I think is reproducible and something that is very worthy of the United States as a country.
Yeah, I think everybody of all ages can relate to this, and certainly some of the people perhaps will remember the film coming out and remember that from their childhoods. And like you said, for the students who are really interested not only in the history of what it would have been like at that time, but also in how they can be inspired by Father Flanagan in their lives today and in their fight for justice.
Well, thank you so much, Victoria, producer of Heart of a Servant, the Father Flanagan Story, which will be playing on October 8th. Tickets are at, tell me again.
fatherflanaganfilm.com.
Well, thank you so much. Again, I just finished watching it. As I told you as we started the segment, I still had tears in my eyes when we started. I'm very touched. I'm very moved. And God bless Father Flanagan. I hope that soon we'll be calling him Saint Father Flanagan. I hope that his cause for beatification proceeds apace. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you so much.
And now Father Roger Landry offers us, as is customary, a short and inspiring homily to prepare us for this Sunday's Gospel.
This is Father Roger Landry. It's a privilege for me to be with you as we enter into the consequential conversation the risen Lord Jesus wants to have with each of us this Sunday. It's one of the saddest dialogues in the Gospel. Repeating what we heard in last week's Gospel, Jesus tells the apostles, the Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him, and 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise. Rather than consoling him, the apostles start arguing about which one of them is the greatest. Whenever Jesus spoke about his upcoming crucifixion, it always seemed to bring out the worst in them. We saw last week that when Jesus told them about it the first time, St. Peter took Jesus aside and tried to rebuke him. On a third occasion, John's and James' mother approached and immediately asked Jesus to appoint her 2 sons to the chief priests in the Messianic reign. If there were any greater illustration of the evil of what St. James will call in the Sunday second reading, selfish ambition, this is it. To get a sense of the ugliness of the apostles' egocentric jockeying for position, imagine your dad came to you and told you that the doctor had just given him 2 weeks to live, and instead of consoling him, instead of even caring about him, you immediately shifted your attention to who would get the house or the car, to ask him before it would be too late, to ask him to intercede to get you a promotion at work. That's what was happening in these scenes. It's sad, ridiculous, and rather disgusting. But Jesus never tried to eliminate his followers' ambition. He wanted to purify it and direct it toward true greatness. He told them the path, which would be his path, the path of cruciform love. If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all. To be great, we must excel in loving service. And to illustrate exactly what he was describing, lest we interpret it according to our own comforts, he took a child and said, "Whoever receives one such child as this in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." An infant is someone who cannot choose to reward us, with whom we cannot engage ever in a quid pro quo. A little child is not even able to thank us. Well, it's true that whenever we love, we receive more than we give, and those who love children receive so many blessings in return. Jesus' point is that we need to love those who cannot return the favor. That's the type of service we're called to give. That's the kind of ambition to which we're supposed to aspire. He did. Sometimes in the church, people are trained to regard all ambition and aspirations to greatness almost as sinful violations of humility, as if every ambition is what St. James calls selfish. But there's a huge difference between a passion for self-aggrandizement, an ego-indulging hunger for riches, honor, and power, or a desire not just to be the best, but to be acknowledged as the best, and a holy zeal for the things of God and his kingdom. St. Paul told us in his first letter to the Corinthians, strive eagerly for the greatest spiritual gifts, and said that they were not things like prophetic gifts, the ability to move mountains, heroic feats of enduring suffering, but rather faith, hope, and especially a charity that's patient, kind, not arrogant or rude. We think about how ambition worked in the life of St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. Prior to the Battle of Pamplona, where he had his leg shattered by a cannonball, he vainly sought worldly honor on the battlefield and in the courts of royals. After convalescing for many months after his injury, studying the life of Christ and reading the lives of the saints, he was filled with a holy ambition and asked, why can't I do what St. Dominic and St. Francis have done? So Jesus wants to purify our ambition, not eliminate it. And in the Gospels, he spoke several times about true greatness, described the characteristics of Christian greatness. Let's examine 5 things he wants us to be ambitious about becoming great in. First, Jesus wants us to be great in faith. He praised the Syrophoenician mother and the Roman centurion for their great faith and longed that in Israel all would emulate it. Second, Jesus wants us to be great in humility. In response to his disciples' question, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus called the child over and said, whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. To be great in humility is not contradictory, just paradoxical. Just like a child is totally dependent on his or her parents, so Jesus wants us to become great in our filial dependence on all God wants to give. The temptation is for us to think we don't need God, that we're self-sufficient. The chief sin of the prodigal son was self-reliance, to treat the father as superfluous, basically as if he were already dead, so that he could get the inheritance now, forgetting that a far more important treasure than half his father's wealth was the relationship with the Father. Jesus indicates for us that the path to greatness is to become great in recognizing our need for and receiving with gratitude all God the Father wants to give. Third, Jesus wants us to be ambitious in our total imitation of his self-sacrificial love. Whoever would be first among you must be the servant of all, he tells us. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus wants us to receive his grace, to grow in the desire to give our life to ransom others from slavery and death. Fourth, Jesus wants us to be ambitious to be saints. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, he said, echoing the prophet's call for us to be as holy as the Lord our God is holy, to be merciful as our Father in heaven is merciful, so that we might become fully the image and likeness of the God who created us. Fifth, Jesus wants us to be great in living by his truths and passing them on to others. Whoever keeps these commandments and teaches others to do so will be called great in the kingdom of heaven, he tells us in the Sermon on the Mount. He wants us to excel as missionaries, as catechists, as teachers of the faith, sharing the gift of our faith by our example and by our words. We can think of the great evangelizers like St. Paul and St. Francis Xavier, the North American martyrs, and others. We think about religious sisters like St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, who taught so selflessly generations of Catholic school students, instilling within them the knowledge and love of God. We can think about so many lay catechists who patiently pass on the faith to children, teens, and adults. We can think about parents, grandparents, and godparents who make it their priority to pass on the faith. We can think about truly apostolic friends who seek to share with those they care about the faith they care about the most. We can ask whether we have the ambition truly to become great in faith rather than remain mediocre, to become great in humility rather than thinking ourselves too great on our own or too small despite God's abundant grace, to become great in self-sacrificial love or average, to become great in holiness rather than remain just a good person, to be great in passing on our love for Jesus rather than keeping this treasure to ourselves. The reality is that just like the apostles at the beginning of the Sunday's gospel, Jesus has told us over and again that he will be betrayed, mocked, tortured, and ignominiously crucified, and then the third day raised. In anticipation of what he would endure, how ugly it was for the apostles to elbow each other for worldly advancement, ignoring the reality and meaning of his passion, death, and resurrection. I would argue, knowing what Jesus has endured for us in our salvation, that it is much uglier for us now to remain only at the level of worldly desires. The Son of God became man, not so that we might ambitiously seek the things of this world while just doing the minimum of coming to Mass, supporting the church, and not committing mortal sins. Please. He died and rose so that we might live new lives in the world but not of it, seeking first the kingdom of God and God's holiness, recognizing that everything else of true value will be given to us besides. The great way we recalibrate our ambitions is to live a truly Eucharistic life, something we cannot consider enough during the ongoing Eucharistic revival of the Church in the U.S. In the Holy Eucharist, Jesus goes way beyond what he did in Calvary. He humbles himself so much to become our spiritual nourishment, seeking to transform us on the inside, so that with him we may give our body and blood, our sweat and our tears, all we are and have out of love for God the Father and for others. When we seek what Jesus gives and teaches us in the Eucharist, when we receive him as he deserves and desires to be received, God can make us great. St. John Vianney, the patron saint of parish priests, once lamented that if his parishioners received Holy Communion more often and more deeply, they could become saints. The Eucharist is where we learn to receive Jesus with love, and in receiving him, to recognize and receive him in children and everyone else he sends us. This sacrament of love teaches us how to love. And so as we prepare for that sacrament on Sunday, and prepare to receive the fruits of Jesus' betrayal, suffering, death, and resurrection, let us ask the Lord for the grace to be filled with a desire and ambition for what really matters, and for all the help he knows we need to act on that holy zeal. Praise be Jesus Christ.
Thank you so much for another exceptional homily, Father Landry. To check out more from Father Roger Landry, make sure to read all of his writings at the National Catholic Register at ncregister.com, and you can listen to his homilies at catholicpreaching.com. We hope to have you back next week, and until then, we go with our prayers.